Hello, my name's Carly. I am the owner and founder of Florence and Flowers. I'm delighted that you've bought one of our dried flower wreath making kits, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time today just talking you through how to put your kit together. So let me talk you through how to use your dried flower wreath kit to make a beautiful indoor everlasting dried flower wreath. So the first thing that you want to take out of your box is your wreath base. So this is a ready-made wreath base made with straw, so it's nice and sustainable, good for the environment, and a nice sturdy base for you to build all of your wreath onto. The second thing that you want to take is your length of twine, so just double that over. This is what we use to hang our completed wreath up with at the end, so we're just going to attach that at the start before we start binding on any of our flowers and grasses. So double that over, feed that through the ring, and then just take the tails, put them through the loop of the twine and pull it nice and tight, like that. So it's a little bit like stringing a gift tag for Christmas, and we then want to just tie a knot somewhere, so it's up to you how long you leave it. I tend to leave mine fairly long so that I've got plenty to play with at the end. And then your loose tails there, I would just tie those into a little bow, like so. So there we have it, that's what's going to hang up our wreath. And then the next thing that we want to do is attach our reel of wire. So the reel of wire is what does all of the heavy lifting in terms of making your wreath. So it's really important that we attach that nice and securely from the outset. So just unravel a short piece of wire. Don't be tempted to unravel too much at any one time. We don't want it all kind of catching on itself and getting tangled. And then we're just going to carefully feed that underneath the wreath frame and tie it on. So one simple knot, not trying to do anything fancy like a double knot because the wire will just catch on itself. And once we've tied that on nice and tightly, that short piece that's left there, we want to probably cut that down, so we've just got about an inch spare, and then bend that and poke that back in on itself into the wreath base, just so we haven't got a sharp scratchy end that's going to catch us or catch a wall at the end. And then that is the reel of wire, nice and securely attached. So now that we've prepped all of that, I'm going to move that to one side. I'm going to put that next to our colour instructions that will come in your pack as well. And I'm going to start getting ready all of my flowers and grasses. So in the pack there are two separate bunches. There's what we call the dried flower bunch, and then there's the grasses or sort of foliage bunch. So with the dried grasses bunch, we will have included lots of wheat. So this is all wheat that's grown in the UK, nice and sustainable, good for the environment again, to be buying sort of locally UK produced grasses. Lots of wheat will be in there. This forms a really good backdrop to a dried flower wreath, makes it look nice and rustic, but it also provides lots of stability in terms of it's a nice backdrop for all of the dried flowers to sit on top of. You're going to end up with a really nice full looking wreath at the end without any gaps. So if you put all of your wheat to one side, and then then we have our dried flower bunch as well. So lots of lovely colours, and again I just like to separate my dried flowers into different piles. So I've got some lovely teasels there grown on our farm, here in Suffolk. And then we've got some helichrysums, some carthamus thistles, some birch twigs to give it that rustic feel, some more different grasses and different things, some beautiful pink larkspur, some red amaranthus, Nigella seed pods. I'm going to cut those ones open. Running out of space because there's so much here. Lots of different Soteria grasses that are coloured different shades. Got some preserved eucalyptus, 2 different types of that, and some of those. Okay, 1 rogue poppy seed head. Okay, lovely. So let's get on and make our wreath. So I'm going to push some of those to that side and some of those there. Okay. So what we're going to do to make up the bulk of our wreath, what we're going to do is we are going to bind on little bunches of dried flowers. Now the first bunch, I always like to include wheat. And actually for every bunch thereafter, I tend to include a bit of wheat as a backdrop. And that's because you're going to get the stability and the fullness by doing that. So if you pick up several pieces and kind of get the heads of your wheat so they're all to kind of the same height. And then on top of your wheat, you can then layer, because you've got that nice sturdy base, you can then layer 2 or 3 other things. So maybe a piece of larkspur, a piece of oats, and maybe a couple of your grasses. So there we go. So I've got a nice bunch. I'm going to cut it down a bit because I don't need all of those stems. So I guess I've cut that to about, I don't know, 15 centimetres, something like that. And this is my first bunch that I'm binding on. So this, I'm going to be quite careful about how I position this, because once you get the first couple of bunches on and they're sitting at a nice angle, pointing in the right direction, the rest of it from that point onwards will flow really nicely. So I'm going to lay that on top of the wreath base, like so. I'm going to hold it firm with my thumb. And what's really important is that the base of the stems are kind of parallel to those inner and outer edges of the wreath base. So they're not pointing inwards to the wreath, they're not pointing outwards, they're parallel, they're laying nicely in the centre there. And then I'm picking up that reel of wire, only unravelling a little at a time, and I'm just binding over the base of the stems and pulling it really tight. So pull it as tight as you can. If you're superhuman and you pull it so tight that the reel of wire snaps, all you do is very calmly just tie it back on like we did at the start. Please don't panic. It's very rare that that would happen. And that is the first bunch of flowers bound on to your wreath base. So from that point onwards, we're just going to keep doing exactly the same thing. So we're going back, we're getting some more wheat, getting all of those heads again to the same height, and then on top of the wheat, layering some of our other things. So you want each bunch to maybe be a little bit different. You want to include a little bit of everything as you go round, but I wouldn't necessarily say that you want to stick to a pattern. I think wreaths look nice when they look quite natural, quite wild. And if you're trying to stick too much to kind of one piece of larkspur here, one larkspur petal there, one nigella seed pod here, you know, you might make it look a little bit kind of prescriptive. So I think just kind of let it flow. You want a fairly even distribution of flowers and colours all the way around, but you'll get that naturally just by kind of mixing up the materials as you go. Things like the eucalyptus, you can make them go really far by just pulling off one or two of the little side pieces at a time. Don't be tempted to put the whole thing in one go. To get the most out of it, you want to cut it down into smaller pieces. So a couple of bits of that. Again, we're going to cut it to the same length that we had it last time. This is how we're going to end up with a really neat circle at the end. Don't need it to be massively neat. We don't want it to look like it's factory made. We want this to look like something that's handmade, handcrafted by you, that you've put your time and your energy and your attention into. We don't want it to look like it's just come off a conveyor belt and that it's identical to everybody else's wreaths. But we probably do want it to look fairly circular at the end. We want that typical kind of wreath shape. So to achieve that, we're going to get that by making sure that each of our pieces are a similar length when we bind them on, and by also making sure that they're each bound on at a similar angle. That is going to result in that fairly consistent circular shape. So exactly as we did at the first part, we're just going to place that on top of the wreath base. So the second piece covers the wire of the first piece. It's kind of overlapping. We're holding it on, just using our thumb again, and then bringing up that reel of wire, up and over, pulling it nice and tight, just like that. So just going around probably 2 or 3 times, and we know that it's nice and secure. If we want to be really super fussy, where we can see a little bit of the inner edge of our wreath base and maybe a little bit of the wire still from the first piece, this is where I would maybe bind on just like a little bunch of something. So maybe one little bit of wheat, one little bit of oats, maybe a little focal flower or something in there, and maybe a little bit of kind of damosa. This is like a filler flower, so it's going to kind of cover up a multitude of sins. So we make like a little bunch, and then we can just kind of pop that on that inner edge like that. Don't want to go too far into the centre, because again, when we hang it up at the end, we want to be able to see that nice little inner circle. But we're going to bind on every now and then a little inner piece, like so. So there we go. So far we've got 2 kind of large outer pieces and 1 smaller inner piece. Every now and then what I like to do is pick my wreath up, turn it round, and I like to look at it from the back, just like you're doing now. And the reason I do that is because when you're looking at something from the behind, you're better able to see whether or not you're following the shape of your wreath. When you look at it from the front, and particularly as we get on binding more and more material on, you'll start to become a bit distracted with all the kind of wonderfulness that's going on the front here. But when you look at it from the back, you can just see it in terms of the shape and the consistency and the width. and you'll be able to see whether or not you're starting to go a bit wider, whether you're starting to come in. So if you've started to cut your pieces suddenly much longer or much shorter, then you'll be able to see if your shape's coming a little bit in and out, which might be the style that you're going for. You might be looking for something that's really wild and eclectic, and that's absolutely fine. This is your wreath, and that's one of the beauties of doing things at home by yourself or with friends, that you can make it your own product. You can personalize it how you want. But if you are someone who's looking for it to be fairly circular, then you just want to look at it from time to time from behind, just so that you can check that you've got that fairly consistent shape running all the way round. Okay. So from that point on, you are just repeating those steps. You're just making up bunches. Most of them are probably going to have wheat as the base. And then on top of that, layering other things. If I use things like this pussy willow here or the sticks, I like to keep those a little bit longer than the wheat. Everything else I probably tend to keep either the same height or a little bit shorter, but things like this I tend to kind of have them sticking out a bit more. So at this point we've got 2 of our large pieces bound on, 1 small piece bound on like so. So from this point onwards, it is just a case of repeating that same process of binding on material, making up small bunches and then binding them on. If I use something like the pussy willow or the sticks, so this one is your pussy willow, and then we've got some of the lovely birch sticks, I like to have those pointing out higher than the wheat, so that at the end, when I hold my wreath up, I've got those kind of really wild kind of pieces coming out. Everything else I probably keep to the same height or even possibly a little bit shorter than the wheat. But again, that is entirely personal taste. So we're just binding on, keeping to the same angle, keeping those stems nicely sitting on that wreath base, like so, and making sure that everything's pushed up nicely against each other. So let's go for a piece of that. How big you make your bunches is entirely up to you. How much stuff you bind on at any one time is entirely up to you. Kind of depends how quickly you want to get your wreath done as well. So when I'm putting them on, I'm making sure that I'm pushing up nice and close to the previous pieces, almost kind of pushing the previous pieces over a little bit. Again, when I hang it up at the end, that's going to ensure a nice full wreath and no gaps. And now that I've got about 4 pieces on, I'm going to include some of my more focal flowers. So these ones you probably do want to space out more evenly. So if you've got maybe 3 teasels in your pack, you might want to think about those being kind of fairly evenly spaced, or you might want to make a little feature of them all being in one area. Again, it's entirely down to what you think looks nice. But I would bind those on individually by themselves, not as part of a bigger bunch, just because they are a focal flower and you want to make sure you're getting those exactly where you want them within the wreath. And your other focal flower is your helichrysum. So again, you're cutting those down a bit shorter and you don't want to kind of lose those right up here. You want to kind of keep those a bit shorter and concentrate those on that inner section. So there we have it. So from this point on, we're just going to keep binding on little dried flower bunches, big ones, smaller ones on the inside, until we get all the way around to the finish. Once we get to that last section, I'm going to show you how to put your final piece in by lifting up this and sliding it underneath. Okay, so once you've finished putting all of your bunches on and you're right at the last stage, this is where it starts to get a little bit trickier. So we're making up that final bunch of dried flowers. You want to make your last bunch fairly wide because it's a little bit of a faff to fit it in. Therefore, you don't want to come back and then find that you've got to fit another one in. So try and make this one quite wide but short. So a nice mixture of different things, whatever you've got left over at this point. Okay, so probably cutting this now a bit shorter than our other pieces, just because we've got to try and lose those stems underneath the first piece. So with one hand, we're carefully lifting this piece out of the way, and then with the other, we're inserting the stems underneath, also making sure that we're not getting our twine caught up that we tied on at the start. So slot those in like that, and then find your wire and bind that on like so, and then that bit will kind of lay back down, and then we just want to fill in that middle section. So I like to save something like one of my teasels for that last section, because I can cover up any last bits. So I'm going to cut him nice and short, and then bind him in like that, and then maybe just a little bit of this filler. I'm just going to try and cover this wire here with this last little bit of filler. So if I can position that there, and while I've still got my wire, I'm going to bring that over again, like that, and then like pulling that really nice and tight, because I'm going to be brave now and cut it off. So turning it over from behind, maybe just tease one or two of those out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to pull this really tight, and I'm going to cut with about 1 inch to spare, and then that inch just gets embedded back into the straw like so, and then find my twine, and then ready to hang up.